Millionaire returned home to find his pregnant wife in tears. What he uncovered stunned him. He names Ellie. And let me take you into a story that begins like a fairy tale, but unravels into something far darker. Picture this: a man who spent years clawing his way up from nothing. No silver spoons, no shortcuts, just grit, endless late nights, and a dream big enough to swallow every doubt. And it worked. By the time most people were still figuring out who they wanted to be, he was already a millionaire. But here's the thing: he wasn't the kind who measured love in dollars. He carried his wife, Anna, with him through every storm. She was there when he had nothing, so when success finally came, he wanted to give her everything. Now fast forward. They're expecting their first child. He's away on business, exhausted but proud, closing deals that will secure their future. And in a rare moment of tenderness, he decides, no phone calls, no hints, just a surprise. He pictures it in his head, walking through the door, seeing her smile, maybe even catching her laugh. That's what he thought he was coming home to. Instead, he found silence. A silence that pressed against the walls like a secret. And then, her, Anna, sitting in the living room, her face streaked with tears, hands trembling over her swollen belly. First, his heart seized. Was it the baby? A complication? A medical scare? He rushed to her side, begging her to tell him what was wrong. But the look in her eyes, it wasn't fear for her health. It was something heavier. Guilt. Regret. A kind of sorrow that words stumble over. And in that moment, he realized, this wasn't about pregnancy. This wasn't about stress. This was about a truth she couldn't keep hidden any longer. What he uncovered next would shake him to his core. It wasn't just shocking. It was the kind of revelation that takes everything you thought you knew about love, trust, and loyalty, and rewrites it in one cruel stroke. Here's the part where I ask, what would you do if the person you trusted most, the one you built your world around, looked you in the eyes and shattered it all? Some people crumble, some rage, but a very few, learn to turn that pain into something else, something sharper. And this is one of those stories. Hey, before we dive deeper, if you love stories where justice isn't just served, but chilled, plated, and delivered with a side of poetic flair, make sure you hit that subscribe button. These scripts take hours of digging, writing, editing, and, honestly, a lot of emotional recovery from secondhand rage. So your support? It means the world, because trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one. David wasn't born into money. In fact, his childhood was the kind most people would rather forget. His father left when he was barely a teenager, and his mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. David learned early that if he wanted something, shoes without holes, food on the table, dignity, he'd have to fight for it himself. He worked odd jobs, saved every penny, and studied late into the night by the dim light of a second-hand lamp. By the time his classmates were out drinking or wasting weekends, David was already building the foundation of something bigger. He didn't know exactly what yet, only that he refused to be ordinary, refused to stay small. The grind shaped him. Long days, longer nights, risks no sane person would take. Startups that failed spectacularly. A few wins that looked like miracles on paper. And slowly, almost painfully slowly, the tide turned. Deals stuck. Investments grew. By 35, he was the kind of man who turned heads when he walked into a room. Not because of his tailored suits or his watch that cost more than his first car, but because he radiated a confidence earned, not bought. But here's the thing about David. He wasn't hardened by success. At least, not completely. Through every high and low, there was Anna. Anna, the girl he'd met when he was just a broke college kid with big dreams and a busted laptop. She saw through the rough edges. She believed in him when there wasn't much to believe in, when his office was a corner of a coffee shop, when the only vacations they could afford were late-night drives to nowhere with cheap gas station snacks. She never asked for much. Just honesty, loyalty, presence. And David gave her that. Gave her everything he had. Even when everything wasn't much. By the time the millions came in, he couldn't imagine anyone else by his side. While other men in his position traded in their high school sweethearts for glossy strangers, David held on to Anna like she was the most valuable investment of all. And now, they were expecting their first child. For David, that was the pinnacle, the closing of a circle, proof that all the sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the scars on his soul, They were worth it. When Anna told him she was pregnant, he cried. Not the silent, movie star tears either. Real, messy tears. Because this was the life he'd been chasing all along. Not the cars or the homes or the numbers on a screen. It was family. Stability. Loved at least. That's how it looked from his side. From the outside, their marriage was enviable. Friends admired it. Colleagues envied it. Anna glowed in ways that only a loved woman does. And David was the doting husband who never missed a doctor's appointment if he could help it. He still brought her flowers, just because. Still leaned in to kiss her forehead when he walked past her in the kitchen. But if you looked closely, closer than most dared, you'd notice the cracks. Subtle, hairline fractures that didn't quite match the picture-perfect frame. A hesitation in Anna's smile when David mentioned his late nights. A shadow in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. The way she sometimes flinched when his phone rang with another deal and he reached to answer it. Apologizing for the 10th time that week, David chalked it up to pregnancy hormones, stress, the natural strain of change. He told himself all couples had rough patches. And in his mind, their foundation was strong enough to weather anything. But here's the quiet truth life teaches us. Foundations don't crumble in a day. They erode, little by little, until one storm too many pushes the whole house down. And David? He had no idea the storm was already on the horizon. Because while he was building empires, trusting the woman he'd sworn his life to, Anna was learning how to keep secrets. Secrets that would change everything. Oh, let me ask you this. Something I've been thinking about since I first read this story. Do you believe money reveals people's true character? Or just makes them bolder about hiding it? David had just sealed one of the biggest deals of his career. The kind of deal that made headlines. The kind of deal people toasted with champagne and whispered about in boardrooms. And while his colleagues booked penthouses and after-parties, David booked a one-way ticket home. Because all he wanted was to see Anna. No calls. No texts. No polite warnings. He wanted it to be a surprise. The kind of surprise where you walk in, drop your suitcase, and get swallowed in a hug that smells like home. He pictured her smile, the way her hands would reach instinctively for him, the way she'd laugh through happy tears. He carried that image all the way from the airport to the driveway. But when he opened the door, the house didn't greet him. It swallowed him whole. Silence. Thick, unnatural silence. Not the cozy quiet of a Sunday morning. The kind that hums in your ears, sharp enough to make you wonder if you should be there at all. He called out her name once. Twice. No answer. His heart started thudding, harder than any boardroom pitch had ever made it beat. Then he saw her, Anna. She was curled up on the couch, clutching her belly as if she could hold the world together with her arms alone. Her shoulders shook. Her face glistened with tears, fresh and endless. Anna? His voice cracked as he rushed to her. What happened? Is it the baby? Are you okay? She lifted her head slowly, and that's when David knew something wasn't right, because her eyes didn't light up with relief. They didn't widen in surprise. They froze, like she'd been caught. David knelt in front of her, his hands trembling as he cupped hers. She didn't lean into him. She didn't cling like she always had in moments of fear. Instead, she flinched. A flinch. At his touch. I'll be honest, that part still chills me. Imagine coming home to the person you love most and realizing your presence doesn't comfort them. It terrifies them. David tried. Again. Softer. Tell me what's wrong, please. But Anna's mouth opened and closed like she was swallowing words that burned on the way up. No explanations. No reassurances. Just silence. And sobs. He pressed his forehead to hers, searching for answers in her eyes. But all he found was guilt. A heavy, suffocating guilt. Anna, he whispered, his voice breaking. You're scaring me. That's when she whispered back, barely audible. You weren't supposed to be here yet. Not supposed to be here yet. The words hit him harder than any betrayal ever could. At first, David tried to rationalize it. Maybe she'd planned some surprise for him. Maybe she was overwhelmed, emotional, lost in the chaos of pregnancy hormones. But the more he studied her face, the less those excuses held weight. Her tears weren't the tears of relief. They were the tears of someone cornered. And if you've ever been blindsided like that, you know the feeling. That creeping realization that something isn't just wrong, it's fundamentally broken. David sat back, his mind spinning. The silence pressed harder. He noticed little things he hadn't before. The way the coffee table was slightly askew. a faint smell of cologne that wasn't his, the discarded wine glass in the sink despite her doctor's orders to stay away from alcohol. The cracks he'd ignored before were suddenly glaring. Undeniable. Anna buried her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered again and again, as if repetition would erase the weight of those words. But sorry doesn't erase. Sorry doesn't undo. Sorry doesn't explain why the woman you love looks more horrified than relieved to see you home. And David? He just sat there, torn between reaching for her and pulling away. His chest burned with questions he couldn't yet ask that he wanted to scream. He wanted to demand answers. But instead, he sat in that crushing silence, knowing the truth was coming whether he was ready or not. Because here's the thing about secrets. They don't stay buried forever. They claw their way to the surface. And when they finally break free, they leave devastation in their wake. David didn't know it yet. But he was standing at the edge of that devastation. Oh, let me ask you. If you came home to your partner crying like this, face streaked with tears, words slipping through clenched teeth, what's the first thing you'd think? Anna's sobs grew harsher, uneven, like each breath hurt. David stayed kneeling in front of her, his hands hovering but not touching. He was afraid that if he reached for her, she'd recoil again. "Anna," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "Talk to me. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." But her response wasn't the relief he expected. She shook her head violently, tears flying off her cheeks. "You don't understand," she stammered. "You can't fix this. I can't undo it." Those words carved into him. Can't undo it. Not won't. Can't. David felt his pulse pound in his ears. Undo what? "Anna, you're scaring me." She tried to steady her breathing, but the words tumbled out in broken pieces. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I was lonely. You were gone so much. I told myself it didn't matter, but it does. Oh God, it does. Lonely. Gone so much." His stomach dropped, but his mind resisted the obvious conclusion. He clung to denial like a lifeline. "Anna," his voice hardened now, sharper than before. "What exactly are you saying?" Her hands covered her face, muffling her confession. "I wasn't alone. I let someone in. And now, I don't even know. David, I don't even know if the baby is yours." Silence. Not the silence of a quiet house. Not even the silence of shock. This was a silence that screamed. David's heart didn't just break. It stalled. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The air was thick, poisonous. His chest ached like someone had driven a fist straight through him. "You?" His voice cracked before he forced it steady. "You're telling me you don't know if the child I've prayed for, planned for, worked for, is even mine?" Anna sobbed harder, rocking back and forth. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I thought it was just a mistake I could bury. But now it's too big. I can't hide it anymore." Her words blurred together, but David heard every syllable, every excuse, every desperate plea. And something inside him shifted. The man who had fought his way out of poverty, who had built an empire from ashes, who had trusted this one woman with everything. He felt that man collapsing, but instead of rage, something colder seeped in. Stillness. That he stood slowly, looking down at her as if she were a stranger. His hands, the same ones that once brought her flowers, now clenched at his sides, empty and useless. "Anna," he said finally, his tone stripped bare. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" She looked up, her eyes wide, almost childlike. I just needed to feel seen. You were always working, always gone. And he was there." David's jaw tightened. "So while I was fighting for us, for our child, for the life we dreamed of, you were finding comfort in someone else's arms." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. She broke down again, wailing into her hands. But David didn't reach for her this time. He couldn't. His love felt like a shattered mirror, every piece sharp, dangerous, impossible to piece back together. And that's when the realization hit him with brutal clarity. His marriage wasn't what he thought it was. His future wasn't what he thought it was. Even his child, the very life he was ready to pour his soul into, was cloaked in doubt. And in that instant, I'll never forget the way this part was written. David knew his marriage was not what it seemed. So let me ask you, what's worse, discovering your partner lied about money or about love? David didn't rage. Not outwardly. That would have been too easy. Instead, he went still, dangerously still. His silence was the kind that didn't just swallow sound. but meaning. Anna thought his lack of explosion meant mercy. In truth, it meant calculation. That night, while she cried herself to sleep, David lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Every second replayed conversations, excuses, the little details he had brushed off because love makes you blind. Now, with clarity burning through him, each memory cut deeper. The late-night calls she dismissed as her mother. The sudden errands that kept her gone longer than they should. The perfume on her scarf that wasn't hers. He had noticed. Of course he had. But he trusted her enough not to dig. Now, trust was a corpse that by morning, his mind was sharp. He kissed Anna's forehead before leaving, his hand steady though his heart wasn't. She thought it meant forgiveness. He knew it was camouflage. David started with the phone bills. Numbers that repeated late at night, always around the time he was away on trips. One in particular showed up like clockwork, 3, sometimes 4 times a week that he copied it down, memorizing it like an enemy's name. Next, he traced her credit card. Small charges at cafes across town. Always on days she'd told him she was too tired to go out. Receipts stacked up, forming a pattern he couldn't ignore. The first crack had come from Anna. But now, David was realizing the fracture line ran much deeper. He remembered his brother's strange hesitations when asking about Anna. The way his so-called friend Mark had always been a little too quick to defend her. At the time, it had seemed harmless. In hindsight, it stank of complicity that he tested them, gently. Over coffee, he asked his brother if Anna seemed different lately. The response was too polished, too fast. No, she's fine. Probably just the pregnancy hormones. Pregnancy hormones. As if betrayal could be excused by biology. And Mark, when David mentioned the late nights, smirked like he was covering for someone. Man, women get restless. You can't hold that against her. David didn't answer. He just studied his friend, realizing he might not be a friend at all. Piece by piece, the facade of his life peeled away. One evening, while Anna showered, he opened her laptop. His hands didn't even shake. He went straight to her emails, and there it was, messages that made his skin crawl. Sentences full of promises, apologies, and longing. She had told another man she loved him, that she felt trapped, that she wasn't sure whose baby she carried. David read them all, every poisoned word. But the worst part wasn't her confession. It was the familiarity in the replies. The other man knew intimate details about his life, about David's work schedule, his business trips, even the surprise homecoming he'd just attempted. That wasn't Anna's loose tongue. That was someone feeding information. And suddenly, David realized he wasn't just betrayed by his wife. He had been surrounded by liars. The walls of his empire weren't crumbling because of outside enemies. No, this was rot from the inside. He closed the laptop quietly and left it exactly how he'd found it. He didn't confront Anna. Not yet. He needed more. He needed to know how deep the roots of betrayal spread. The next week, he played the part of the devoted husband. Flowers, dinners, gentle smiles. She believed it. Everyone believed it. Meanwhile, David traced the number he'd found in her call history. It belonged to Mark. Of course it did. The friend who'd toasted at their wedding. The man who had once promised David loyalty. The same man now answering calls in the middle of the night, whispering words to the woman carrying David's unborn child. The rage almost consumed him then. But instead of exploding, David filed it away, like a weapon not yet sharpened. That he watched more closely. Anna slipped up one evening, claiming she'd been with her mother while her phone pinged on the opposite side of town. He didn't call her out. He smiled, kissed her cheek, and said nothing. And with every smile, every quiet nod, David grew colder. He wasn't just losing his wife. He was losing his faith in people altogether. Family, friends, bonds he thought unbreakable now felt cheap. Fragile. It's strange, isn't it? How one betrayal can spread like a stain, forcing you to question every person, every memory? David wasn't naive anymore. He was methodical. And as he pieced together the lies, he realized something chilling. This wasn't a one-time slip. It wasn't an accident. It was a pattern, a routine, a deliberate deception woven into his everyday life. By the time he uncovered the truth in full, the man who had once built his empire through sweat and sacrifice was gone. In his place stood someone quieter, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. And he understood now. This wasn't just betrayal from Anna. It was betrayal from everyone who smiled in his face while holding a knife behind his back. Oh, let me ask you. Do you think betrayal hurts more when it comes from one person or when multiple people are complicit? David had always been decisive. Deals, investments, negotiations, he thrived in clarity. But now, his heart was a battlefield. On one side was rage. Not the loud kind, but the slow-burning fury that tightens your chest and clenches your jaw when no one's looking. On the other side was love, the kind that whispered every time he saw Anna's swollen belly. That child, innocent and unknowing, was his. At least, he prayed it was. And how do you burn down a house when you're not sure if your child is still inside it? Nights became the hardest. He'd lie awake, listening to Anna's breathing beside him. Some nights it sounded peaceful, other nights it sounded guilty. He'd turn over, watching the silhouette of her body in the dim glow of the clock, and wonder, how much of this life was real? How much of it was theater? Anna, for her part, tried to patch the cracks. She fussed over dinners, smiled too brightly, and touched his arm like nothing had changed. "You've been so quiet lately," she said one evening, sliding a plate of roast chicken toward him. David looked at the food but didn't lift his fork. His silence filled the room, louder than any accusation. Finally, he said, "Quiet men think the most." Her smile faltered. She looked down. "David, you can't hold stress inside like this. It's not good for you. Or the baby." The baby. She wielded the word like a shield, as if invoking it could erase her sins. He almost snapped then. Almost. But he forced the storm back down, swallowing hard. The time for eruption hadn't come. Instead, he mastered restraint. He asked questions softly, casually. Where had she been yesterday? Did she talk to her mother? Was she feeling better? Each one a test. Each answer a performance. He watched her eyes dart, her hands fidget, her voice lift half a pitch higher when she lied. And yet, when her hand rested absent-mindedly on her belly, something inside him ached. That child wasn't at fault. That child deserved a father who wasn't consumed by vengeance. So, David waged war within himself. Leave and abandon the child he had longed for. Stay and suffocate under the lies. Fight and risk becoming a man his child would fear. Anna sensed the tension. She tried soft apologies without naming the crime. "I know I haven't been perfect," she whispered one night. "But I love you. I love us." David turned to her, eyes searching hers for even a flicker of truth. "Do you?" he asked quietly. Her lips trembled. "Yes, of course." But she couldn't hold his gaze. And that silence between them said more than her words ever could. Days bled into weeks. David went to work, closed deals, shook hands, and smiled in public. Behind closed doors, he became a shadow of himself. But not a broken shadow, more like one sharpening into a blade. His restraint was deliberate. Every unanswered question was a thread he tucked away. Every suspicious glance was a mark on his mental ledger. He wasn't going to blow up and walk away with nothing. He was going to know, fully, completely, before he moved. That's the thing about men like David. The ones who build empires from nothing don't just crumble when betrayed. They study, they plan, they rebuild, not with trust, but with precision. Still, the inner war never quieted. One afternoon, he walked past the nursery they had painted together. Soft yellow walls, a crib waiting for its tiny occupant, stuffed animals lined up like soldiers. He placed his hand on the rail and whispered, "I'll protect you." He didn't know if he was promising the baby or himself, and when Anna called from the other room, asking if he wanted tea, he forced a smile and answered, "Yes, please." His voice calm, his body coiled, because now he wasn't just a husband. He was a father in waiting and a strategist sharpening every second. The war inside him wasn't over. But soon, the war outside would begin. So let me ask you, would you confront everything at once or stay quiet and collect proof? It came on a Tuesday. Funny how ordinary days often hold the moments that change everything. David wasn't looking for it. He was just checking the mail stacked on his desk, a pile of envelopes Anna had forgotten to mention. Most were harmless, bills, flyers, the usual. But one stood out, a hotel receipt, dated for the same weekend Anna had claimed she was visiting her sister. Room for two, dinner and champagne charged to the suite. His hands didn't shake. His pulse didn't race. Instead, a strange stillness washed over him. like the world had finally stopped pretending. Later that night, he tested her one last time. "How was your sister's?" he asked casually, watching her cut strawberries in the kitchen. "It was good," she answered too quickly. "We just stayed in, talked about the baby." David nodded, even smiled faintly. He didn't press. He didn't accuse. Because now, he didn't need to. The receipt was fact. Undeniable. Irrefutable. And with it, every fragile thread of hope snapped. He excused himself early, saying he had work emails to answer. In reality, he sat in his study, the receipt laid flat before him. He stared at it for a long time. Not in disbelief. Those days were gone, but in clarity. This was the final straw. The end of David, the trusting husband. The man who once thought love could survive anything. What replaced him was colder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. That he thought about the years of sacrifice, the nights he'd worked until dawn, the risks he'd taken, not just for himself, but for her. For them. And this was what it had been worth to her. Cheap champagne in a hotel room. Lies told with a steady voice. Betrayal disguised as domestic bliss. When Anna called from upstairs, asking if he was coming to bed, he answered evenly. In a bit. His tone was calm. Too calm. Because sometimes, the calmest person in the room is the one planning the storm. And in that silence, David's decision crystallized. There would be no more second chances, no more blind loyalty, no more pretending this marriage was anything but a facade. He wasn't going to confront her with shouting or slammed doors. That would give her power, let her twist the story, cry her way back into control. No, David was done playing on her terms. This time, everything would be on his. The old David would have shouted. He would have demanded explanations, begged for honesty, maybe even clung to the hope of repair. But that man was gone. What rose in his place was someone colder, calmer, dangerously precise. David slipped into strategist mode. The same mindset that had taken him from a broke kid with nothing but drive to a millionaire with an empire. Except now, the boardroom wasn't his battlefield. His marriage was. And this wasn't about profit anymore. This was about justice. That he began with silence. Silence is powerful. It unnerves people more than rage. Anna noticed it immediately. The way he no longer asked questions. The way he looked at her, not with pain, but with calculation. She mistook it for distance. What it really was control. In private, David started building his foundation. A quiet phone call to his lawyer, an old friend who owed him more than one favor. Another to his financial advisor, ensuring certain assets were untouchable. He pulled documents, checked accounts, traced movements. Every detail mattered. And while Anna fussed over nursery paint colors and baby showers, David was creating a very different kind of checklist. One that ended with her seeing exactly what betrayal costs. What struck him most was how easily he could separate emotion from action now. The love he once felt, it had been scorched clean. What remained was resolve. Cold, hard resolve, he told himself. Asterisk, I won't raise my voice. I won't waste my breath. I'll let the facts do the talking. Asterisk, and slowly, allies began to circle. A trusted colleague offering discreet information. A cousin who had always suspected Anna wasn't what she seemed. People who had stayed silent before now whispered truths, knowing David was finally ready to hear them. Piece by piece, the puzzle locked into place. And with each new revelation, David's focus only sharpened. He no longer felt like the betrayed husband, stumbling through lies. He felt like the architect of something bigger, an inevitable reckoning. Anna sensed something had shifted. She tried to draw him back in with soft touches, practiced apologies, half-hearted pleas. David, you've been so distant lately. Are we okay? He met her gaze, steady and unflinching. We're fine. But his tone carried no warmth, only certainty. And if she had been wiser, she would have heard the truth in it. Asterisk, we're fine for now. Until I decide otherwise. Asterisk, there's a particular kind of empowerment that comes when pain turns into clarity. That was David now. Not blinded by heartbreak, not lost in fury. Focused, grounded, dangerous in his patience. Because when trust is broken, you can't always fix what's lost. But you can decide who pays the price. And that's where David stood. No longer the broken husband, but the man who had clawed his way out of shock and silence into something far stronger. Betrayal hadn't destroyed him. It had reshaped him, hardened him, given him clarity he never asked for, but now carried like a weapon. What Anna thought was weakness, his quiet, his patience, was really the beginning of her undoing. Because sometimes, strength doesn't come from shouting or slamming doors. It comes from the stillness before a storm. And David was that storm, waiting for the exact moment to strike. That I think that's what makes stories like this so gripping. They remind us that betrayal isn't just about the act, it's about the aftermath, about how someone decides to rise from it. And David, he wasn't just rising, he was rebuilding himself into something unshakable. But here's the real question: was his silence mercy, or the sharpening edge of justice? I guess you'll have to stick around to see how far he's willing to go, and just how much Anna will regret underestimating him. If you found this story as gripping as I did, don't forget to hit like, comment, and subscribe. These scripts take hours to create, and your support helps keep these stories alive. Trust me, you won't want to miss the moment when David finally cashes in every ounce of patience for the justice he deserves.